Oh, hey, Mike. Sorry, I didn't see that you joined.
Oh, hey.
Let me. I can not blur my background for the first time because I'm actually in the office and I don't have a whiteboard behind me. So, yeah, let me get the notes up. You can still hear me, right? Okay. I hardly ever come in, so now we're gonna get a bunch of fist bumps like along the way. Let me get the meeting notes up. Hi, Cassie. Thank you for joining.
Hello.
I'm trying to make my Chrome browser work properly. Google Docs. Thanks, folks, for bearing with me while I open up my browser here. Yeah. Okay, you should be able to see my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Okay. Today is June. Oh, okay, June 28th. And I will put this in the chat so if people can sign in, including myself, which I've not signed in yet.
Hey, Mobile.
Hey, Jay. That's the only reason why I'm in the office is because I'm donating blood today. Having a blood drive. But other than that, I hardly ever come in. Okay, and so Mike, I'm gonna bump you down so that we can welcome new folks. Okay, so I know there is at least one new person. If you don't mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about why you came today.
Hi, so I guess that's me. I am Cassie Crossley and at Schneider Electric. I have been working on the software transparency and the SBOM initiative at our company for the last several years. I'm Vice President for Supply Chain Security, and I wanted to get more aligned to what's happening in the OpenSSF forums. So I have added this one. I've already been on skip meetings for the IETF, but I added this one and I think one or two others to my calendar so that I can start attending. I think it was the, now I can't recall which one it was. Oh, the end users working group.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I plan to attend that one.
Users. Yeah, I think that one has the SBOM everywhere, right, Mike?
Right.
Yeah. So that one's a good one to attend.
Yeah.
SBOMs everywhere. So, okay, well, welcome, Cassie. So this meeting, it's been shifted a couple times. We used to be focused mainly on SALSA, but we've been up leveled earlier this year. Basically, we are focused on all of supply chain integrity and the subgroups. So that includes Fresca, S2C2F, and potentially GUAC once it's official that it gets donated, and just trying to get the word out and education to people about, what we're trying to do and how to use the tools, et cetera. So that's really what we're all about here, is just trying to evangelize and make sure that, we have coverage across all of the different work subgroups. And if there is a gap anywhere, whether it be in our tooling, in maybe our assumptions, that we try to course correct when possible. So that's pretty much it.
And And
So-
that's one of the reasons why I'm joining, is to really represent the OT space on a lot of these pieces. I'm on the JCDC OSS group for OT, and even just like the S2C2F, it doesn't account for, you cannot update open source libraries in an OT world without going through a full regression, safety, reliability testing. So it's rare that we will do updates. Sometimes we'll backport the patches, but generally from an OT environment, we there's already enough non-encrypted protocols, things like that. So you're not supposed to be putting them on the internet for certain reasons anyway. So the likelihood of exposure. So in fact, I was just on a Adrian and I were on the RSA webcast along with Jeff Shutt from Cisco yesterday on supply chain software transparency.
Okay, awesome. Well, you're in good company. Jay is one of the maintainers for S2C2F.
Right. Jay, you and
Yeah.
I've met before. I can't recall which meetings, but I definitely, we
Yep.
might have even met in person. I can't recall if you've been on the OSS JCDC meetings or what.
I've been everywhere. So if I stumbled into that meeting, it was probably by accident. But
Okay.
I probably
Yeah,
probably met you
JCDC,
there for-
ACDC, sorry.
yeah, the Joint Collaborative
JCDC.
something or another, the CISA
Yeah.
JCDC meetings.
Okay. Okay, well, welcome. Yeah, you're definitely in good company,
Good.
right? We all want to make sure that we cover as much use cases that we possibly can. We definitely haven't talked about OT. I don't recall in any of these meetings over the last year. So it'd be good to have a different perspective. Okay, next on the agenda, Mike.
Sure. So there's two things. What were the two things I put on there again? Oh, right. So one of the things was with Salsa V1 out, starting to still see some folks who are giving presentations on Salsa, still using old Salsa V0.1, 0.2 tables, diagrams, etc. So one of the things that, and then this, in addition to that, recently had a discussion with some of the other folks from LF Asia, who seem to be interested in pushing some Salsa stuff, but they're like, hey, are there any materials that are out there that I could just sort of pull from and pull into some presentations I want to give? So one of the things that seemed that maybe makes sense is something like adding something to a repo. Whether it's inside the same, just inside of our normal Salsa repo with just like diagrams or whatever, just like some content that folks can just sort of pull from and we kind of point people to, might be useful. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Just a little suggestion there of like, hey, I think as we are looking to, and this is kind of also goes beyond that, but also I think one of the things that might be really useful to come out of the supply chain integrity group is some more just sort of basic materials for like what the mission is and how do we just sort of describe it, because one of the biggest pieces of feedback we've gotten was, wait, I'm still confused because somebody else just showed me something that had a different thing, or somebody had a diagram that said Salsa 5 or whatever, and you're like, yeah, that's not true. There's confusion still. So what we can do to clarify that would be great.
So quick question, Mike. Are you envisioning something like a one pager, right? Because there's the salsa.dev. So I'm trying to figure out how it would be different.
So it's literally just sort of pulling the stuff out of salsa.dev into a collection of things that we can pull from. So the idea here is a lot of folks are like, they look at salsa.dev and they're like, okay, which of these diagrams is the most important, whatever, like just something like, hey, here's the images, here's all of them in a single spot. Even it might even just be a one pager that points people to, oh, if you're looking for diagrams, they're under Salsa they're under the Salsa framework under /diagrams or whatever. If you're looking for the tables, they're good. Like, this is what the table looks like, so that folks who are pulling out of it, you know, can just say, hey, make sure that you're just, you know, looking here for salsa, you know, the salsa logo. Yeah. A lot of folks right now are, you know, just, you know, right clicking the image on the website, pulling off, you know, pulling it down, which makes sense. But I think the thing that would be useful is if we have it all sort of centralized, and once again, not just purely salsa, but some of the other stuff that we've been building in the supply chain integrity group for presentation purposes, so that folks who are developing presentations or whatever, we can just say, hey, make sure you're always keeping track of this repo, because it's always going to have the latest stuff on there. Because, you know, I think I have a link in there. You know, somebody gave another talk on salsa, and it still has salsa level 1 through 4. It still talks about some of the old wording we were using, and so on.
Okay, for presentations. Okay, got it. And I saw Marcella gave a thumbs up. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on this approach? Go ahead, Marcella.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me? I'm not using the same headset today.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. So to Mike's point though about the level 4 being included, sometimes, at least internally for us, I think there's still a bit of an assumption that a level 4 will exist in the future. And so how can we sort of, I mean, we essentially want to be prepared for when a level 4 or other tracks do come in. And so how do we, how do we resolve this, I guess, is a question that probably arises.
So can you ask the question a different way? How do we resolve the fact that people are still referencing level 4, but there isn't a level 4, but we know that there will be? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. So essentially, right, like, I think a lot of us who have been looking at salsa v 0.2, for example, and people who maybe saw 0.2, but then weren't super involved with version 1, but now are saying, okay, well, there will be a level 4 at some point, there will be a source track or verified builds or all these different aspects we've been talking about. And so I guess the question I'm sort of putting out there, I don't have a good answer, is how can we sort of communicate, how can we separate the two better in communications and sort of help people understand what is and isn't part of V1? I wonder if there's almost still like a lack of understanding of, yeah, like we acknowledge that level 4 still will exist, but it's not part of V1. And so don't talk about it as if it was, you know, like, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that also ties into some of what I think that's worthwhile. And I know this is like, we're not an organ, you know, we're not a company per se, but there is that thing around like you know, the way that different organizations set up sort of like a branding guide of like, hey, here's how you sort of talk about these things. I think, you know, writing up a couple of small things around, you know, like maybe an FAQ and some other things so that folks can sort of read that up. Like the thing I'm worried about is like, so we removed L4 and people are still super confused. And like, I think we did a lot of great work on the actual spec, but we're not doing a very good job on the actual marketing, on the education, on a lot of the other pieces. And for what it's worth, the LF has very clearly expressed that they would be more than happy to help out here, set up webinars, do a lot of that legwork in setting it up, because I know we all have way too much stuff on our plate. But yeah, I think on that end, you know, it would be really useful, because I think the thing here is like, there's a big difference between saying, hey, it sounds like the community is probably gearing towards pushing towards a L4, and that will probably look something like this, versus this is what it is, because it's going to be very different for folks who are like, yeah, I'm familiar with Salsa V1, V0.1 or V0.2 and the other stuff that we were doing, and then Salsa V1. and they can go and say, oh, okay, I see you took out L4 now, and I see that. But for folks who are just learning, they're seeing the stuff and going, I don't understand. I see over here it says L4. I see over here it says L3. I see somebody wrote an article in, blah, 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 that says L5. What's going on? And I think as at least from the perspective of the LF, it's going to be very, like, they're going to want to make sure that we are, very consistent with that messaging. And so anything that we could do to help out there would be useful.
So if I may, I want to piggyback on the for new folks, it can be confusing. That's not even a statement just about L4. There are people that come to me asking, how do I do this? Like, it's not about the coding. It's about, I don't understand what's happening, right? And so for new folks that don't know salsa, they haven't been around, they're just trying to make sense of it and what's required. And it's not easy for them to even figure out what's required of them to show that they are salsa level 2 or salsa level 3. They know that there's this, provenance, they know that there's this VSA, but they still don't quite get it, even though there is the salsa.dev. And so maybe that goes back to some of the issues that we talked about and I created, where maybe we need to start doing these things, right? Because I know we talked about these, like a deep dive on salsa, right? Training modules, and that would be with the LF, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So potentially, once we start getting going with this, we can definitely help that confusion. But I think we need to do micro videos. We can't wait, months, because things will change in months. So I can do a video, but I'm not good at editing or anything like that. So how can we quickly put out like a 2-minute, like, this is salsa 101 for new people, like this is what it's all about? How can we get to that point where we start talking about, okay, yes, there's these different levels, but we're just going to focus on version 1.0, which is the latest, right?
Yep.
And this is what it means. So I don't know what folks' thoughts are on that.
So from my end, definitely hear on that one. And in fact, actually, it's one of the things that as part of the next thing I wanted to talk about, which I think actually at this point is all related. So Julian from LF, he's the VP of Linux Foundation and OpenSSF, their Asia APAC stuff, which I had just learned apparently based on how everything's organized. It's different than Japan. So there's Japan, and then there is APAC, which, so for example, stuff like Singapore, India, and I think even Australia are all kind of considered part of that section, but Japan is kind of its own thing. But anyway, he was talking about setting up some webinars, some introductory webinars, probably in August. I sort of said, yep, definitely willing to kind of help out there. I think one of the things that's kind of related here, and it's kind of also related to some of the issues we're running into from the tooling perspective, and it's something that bringing up to the OpenSSF, which is when it comes to the spec, obviously it's a huge community movement. It's a very open yada yada. But when it comes to developing content outside of some basic stuff, right? When it comes to developing training and content and yada yada, it's hard for a lot of groups to say, hey, I just don't have the time and this is volunteer effort. So there's discussion about, what could, from a, compensation standpoint or some sort of other way of kind of doing that. And one of the things that was discussed was like, hey, whether it's, because this is the same sort of thing that if you'll notice LF does already today, is like, the such and such training module built in collaboration with a certain vendor. And in certain cases, it's money exchanges hands, and the LF has a lot of money from all of our member dues, so they can help pay for this as well. But in addition to that, there's also things like, publicity from the person who is, let's say, giving that, it's like they can sort of say, oh, the LF is bringing this on, brought to you in collaboration with the vendor that developed the training or that marketing, which is I think super helpful, because we're seeing the same thing right now from the tooling perspective. Like at some level, it's like the thing I've heard, for example, reaching out to some of the folks about the Maven thing you were talking about, that was yesterday, was a lot of people are like, great, who's paying for the Maven tool to build Salsa? Like, who's paying for it?
Yeah.
Or, like, how's that all working? And like,
Yeah.
there's a million things kind of going on there. And so, yeah, I think like that's kind of where there's been some push, right? Like there's certain things we can definitely do, I have no problem like attending a meeting or giving a presentation, but if there's going to be something like, hey, look, we're going to need to actually generate some content, we all have way too many things on our plate. So there'll have to be some way of saying like, yeah, the cost of doing this is offset so we can kind of actually provide it.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So Marcel, I see you wrote micro video sounds good. Right. It's just like me, right? It's not like I'm happy to help, but we also don't want to wait months, right? I know for the Salsa 1.0 announcement, I know that's bigger because they have to come up with, a line of it's not speakers, it's people that interview, right, for Salsa, like Tech Radar or something like that. They line those people up for the announcement. But it was a little over a month just to get that announcement out that door. And it was not just one person, it was many people. And so that's my concern. If we can get like quicker turnaround time, sure, I don't mind engaging with Jennifer Bly. So I think we'll just have to ask her, how quick is it to do something like that? So let's see.
Yeah, and she probably also knows who to connect us with to do video editing and that kind of stuff. That's why I was bringing that up too.
Yeah.
And it's what Mike said before too, right? Like there's LF folks that want to help with this as well. So
Yeah. Or who to go to for video editing. Okay. The other thing, I think I mentioned it on Monday, Mike, for the APAC stuff. There was a Google person in APAC that did a Salsa presentation. And so there is someone over there that knows, right, outside of just DLF, that knows about Salsa and is willing to talk about Salsa. So potentially we can, piggyback. I don't know anybody else, right? I'm just picking on that one person because they had a meetup in Hong Kong and he was part of the meetup. And
Yeah, so this is Julian and those folks who are doing that sort of thing. And I know it's somebody from Google, but I think the thing is that person is not really a huge member of the community. And so I think the thing is how do we also then, one of the big questions has been, which I had sort of said, I have no problem, for example, once or twice, right? Like staying up till 2 a.m. and giving a presentation to APAC to help seed that. And then from there, the community can kind of drive it forward. Because I think there are folks also from Oracle and Samsung and other places that are somewhat involved, but like it's been kind of difficult. So there's two separate things. One was an end user side of things, right? Like this is how are we helping drive end user engagement to make sure that folks recognize like, hey, there's stuff like, Europe folks who are focused on Salsa, separately, there is that discussion of how do we get those same folks who might have feedback and say, I want to contribute back to the spec. Is there ways to have that feedback come in where it's not like, because for a lot of those people, I believe the meeting is, around midnight, but somewhere between like 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. their time, whenever we have a lot of the Salsa meetings. And so are there ways that we can kind of synchronously or asynchronously set something up so that feedback can come to us once in a while. That would be valuable as well. But yeah, as far as the webinar goes, they have, I was asked to kind of give a webinar, no problem doing that, at least initially, right? But I think in addition to that, some folks were also even asking like, hey, could we create a webinar even just for the US stuff? Because a lot of folks have a lot of questions about salsa, and the community meetings are not necessarily the right path. And I even heard from a few folks like office hours are great if folks have like a really specific larger question that they want to kind of get addressed, but something like an introductory webinar of something like, hey, here is us showing off like the tools, how everything works, how everything is structured, and a really introductory sort of training of this is what salsa is, this is why you should care, and then this is a basic implementation and how it all works, and what are the expectations against a lot of it, right? Because like, I think to your point, Melba, it depends on who you're talking to, because you read the requirements and like, for example, it makes total sense to me. It makes total sense to certain folks, but other folks in different audiences are going to say, actually, I'm not 100% sure what that means. And I don't know where to get started and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So in terms of I know there's the webinars, and we talked about, well, shouldn't we use the salsa community, right? Meetings. I think is it biweekly or monthly now? The overall one to do some of this stuff, but then I feel like the people that show up don't want to have a one-on-one. They want to have more advanced things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, talking to the community, the thing I keep hearing time and again is the community meetings are very useful for understanding what is the status of things, where are we with certain bodies of work, or hey, I have a very specific question about like, I'm seeing you work on this, but why are you working on this, not that? Whereas a lot of folks are just like, where do I get started with salsa? And that sort of level of stuff I think is confusing to folks. And then even something like, the thing I've heard is even something like an office hours is not always the greatest way of doing that, because a lot of folks are just like, no, I want to just, I don't want to ask questions. I want to just be told here's the basics, and then afterwards, oh, now I have a question. That thing seemed to be, which is why I think a lot of folks are pushing for this, like these webinars, these trainings and those sorts of things. And I think it kind of goes into, some of the stuff that Jay was talking about with S2C2F of like, hey, we've recorded a bunch of training content, and that sort of stuff is super successful. So if we can kind of create some salsa training content, it might be, super valuable. And I think as we've kind of talked about before, as well as like, not everybody wants to read a million things. So even something like a micro video, something like a 5-minute, like, hey, so you don't know what salsa is. Okay, here's the basics. Oh, great. Now I have that idea. Now I know, like, now I can dive into, the other pieces.
So Jay, if you created training content, was that because Microsoft created it, or how did you go about doing that?
Actually,
For
no.
S2C2F?
We were going with LF, the SKF, and then LF training, and that's who we were. We started the process with them, and then all we had to do was follow up and create these training modules, and it takes a little bit of time. But we even inquired not just about S2C2F and the training model and the training modules there, but we even asked that for salsa too, because we figured if we can get S2C2F and those training modules off the ground, we might think about getting those training modules set up for salsa as well. The thing about salsa is that once again, we're dealing with the tracks. So the training modules for each track. How the hell do we negotiate that? But the idea was to utilize the systems that utilize the resources we already have. LF training and SKF that is already writing training for LF. Why not utilize those resources for all of these frameworks and everything else we got going on as well. So that was the idea behind that. But it definitely wasn't a Microsoft thing. It was purely an OpenSSF, and it was purely just so that for S2C2F, for Salsa. Hell, I think I even mentioned this to Mike before about Fresca even. We should really be thinking about, and I guess this is at the working group level. I don't know that I mean, do we talk about it here in the positioning side? But I think at the working group level, we should definitely be thinking about how do we, especially when it comes to adoption, how do we, get people to adopt, and that best way to do that is through providing training and training modules so they get a better understanding of use cases and everything else.
Who did you work with to start that process?
So we talked with Randall, but then we ended up speaking with God. And I got that this is going back months. Like I want to say at least 6 or 7 months. But there was a Tom and I know Randall gave us the introduction. I think Randall is still doing that work with LF and SKF. But then there was Tom and then I want to say Michael, and I can't remember their names. They're in the notes. God, they're in the notes.
Yeah, if you're able to, I did not mean to do that. If you're able to find the names, and if you want, you can tag it in here because we have a task in the working group to start doing that. So potentially we can just start piggybacking off that.
Yeah, that's what
issue.
It's like 2 or 3 notes pages ago or something like that. I mean, the notes pages have all changed. So I got to go back through those. But once I snatch those names out, I'll throw them inside of the inside of the issue there in the repo.
Okay, thank you, Jay.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions, comments?
If it's helpful, we recently released a pretty thorough, currently ebook, soon to be real book, real printed book, that covers a lot of salsa and how to actually start incorporating it. And we do we put out a ton of salsa content on the active state side. One of the things that we get asked for a lot is just like examples, like what does provenance actually look like, or what does an SBOM or an attestation actually look like? I think people are confused about what the actual print output should be, and then also what they should do with it. So we get a lot of questions about like, hey, once I have this thing, like what do I do next, right? So that's where a lot of our resources are built around, is like practical how to use these things, like how they apply to the exec order mandate. And what does salsa level 3 actually mean? Because I do agree with whoever made this comment earlier that people are confused between the levels now and what the highest level of attainment actually is. But I'm happy to share all the stuff that we've written to if it's helpful, and volunteer myself in the active state group to help script things or write things or contribute things as needed there.
Yeah, that would be extremely helpful. Yeah, if you can put a link in the notes when you get a chance.
Sure.
That would be fantastic.
No problem.
Yeah. Yes. Any with education. Oh, I hate the new emoji thing. I just want to do a regular smiley, and it auto completes. It used to auto complete. Now it doesn't. Now you have to do, colon and then smile. I just want to do a regular smile without having to click on stuff. Anywho, any other thoughts, comments on this? No. Okay. So I heard a couple volunteers for videos. And Marcella, I tried to tag you, but it's not fine. Now it finds you. It wasn't letting me last time.
Okay.
It just, I had to like copy and paste it, but it wasn't linking it to you for some reason. I don't know why. And I am not logged in. But I don't know when you wanted to try to do this one, because you said that could be a quick video.
Yeah, yeah, and I think some of it, I might, at least to start with, just pull some content out of like talks I've given around why things like SBOM, salsa, and other metadata are needed, right? And so like, yeah, I say this knowing that probably it will take me longer than I think it will, but yeah, I can definitely give this a shot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, feel free to update the issue, right? And then in parallel, I'm gonna try to reach out to Jennifer Bly just to see, you know, what our options are for some of these things. So that maybe it can make it faster for us, right? Oh, yes, I can. Here you go, Claudia. Yeah, let me know if you can't access it, Claudia. You should be able to. Yeah, okay. And I forgot to mention, folks, that I mentioned it earlier that I'm donating blood today, which is why I'm in the office. So I actually have to like bolt in like 9 minutes. So if you all want to keep the meeting going, by all means. But I am gonna have to leave early. Okay. And go ahead, Marcella.
Yeah, so sorry, just to close out on the video script.
Oh, sure.
So are we should I write it like some kind of script? I haven't really done this much, but I can sort of just put together like a 1-page thing, and I guess someone just reads it and it becomes a voiceover. I'm not sure. I'm not sure people want to see my face. So like, and it's really not the important part, right? So but I guess timeline wise, like should we aim for like a month from now? Like what is reasonable, I guess?
For this one, right? This is the one you're talking about.
Yeah, this one or any.
Yeah, I would say the salsa ones will probably want to plan on multiple, like what the logic is. Not logic, what the content is, and think of multiple ones, like, you know, here's intro 101, right, in 5 minutes, right? And then here is this in 5 minutes, right? Because if we just do one and then take another month or two to release the next, it might be a bit much, or too long rather. So I think this one might take a little bit more thought process behind. So if you want to do this one, I think you said you had content for this, so it might be the easiest one to just check off our list. Keep doing that, sorry.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah. So I'm fine with whatever you're comfortable with, and I definitely would, if you're writing the script, right, you should get full credit for it. I know you may not want your face out there. I can understand that. But if we can figure out a way of somehow linking you to it so that you get credit for it, that would be my personal option, or my preference, I should say.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I also need to talk to the like media release people on my end. There's
Got
some
it.
of that red tape stuff.
I understand. I
yeah.
understand.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some other sort of, because this institutional trust question versus like metadata and provenance is, I think there might be some other sort of more core background topics that would help people understand salsa. So maybe that's something to queue up for a future meeting, is just figure out what some of these other topics are that would provide enough background for people to help for people to understand salsa, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that actually ties into some of the supply chain integrity stuff. Because I think one of the interesting things I found recently going to a couple of like more developer focused conferences or DevOps focused conferences is everybody knows of SolarWinds, everybody knows of Log4j. Surprisingly few people, like, you know, in a room full of these people, you know, these folks, like maybe 5% to maybe 10% have heard of supply chain security. You know, maybe 5 to 10% have heard of an SBOM. And in fact, some folks had heard of Salsa from a build security perspective, but they had never heard, like, they didn't know that that was tied it back into supply chain. There was like, oh, I was just reading it, you know, reading it up on it from the perspective of like, you know, just build security.
You said DevOps.
Yeah. So this was actually recently at DevOps Days in New York City. And there was very few people who had heard of supply chain security before that. Yeah. Though a lot of folks had heard of like the issues, right? That something like a Salsa is either trying to prevent or detect.
And supply chain. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely giving a lot of internal talks about supply chain security because to be like, hey, you know, we're not trying to be, you know, PETAs in CISO, right? We very much are trying to protect ourselves and our customers, right? So we're not trying to make your lives miserable. There's a real need to do some of this stuff. So I can understand people not knowing. And then once you kind of open their eyes, they're like, oh, okay, I get it. I get it now. Okay, does somebody want to take over? Do you want to continue the meeting? Because I do have to drop. No volunteers?
I'm good
Okay.
with something here. I mean, it was like with 15 minutes left, 18 minutes left. I mean, then unless there's anything else anyone wants to cover in these 18 minutes, it's good. We can stop here.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I've been in back-to-back meetings, so I actually have to hop off real quick before my next one.
Okay. Well, thanks folks for joining, and Cassie, thank you for joining your first time. Hopefully we can talk about, you know, OT next time. Just put on the agenda.
No.
We can
Yeah.
talk
So
all day
I
long.
won't be here next week, but no, I just wanted to participate and give that perspective. So we don't.
Yeah, definitely put on the agenda for next time. But yeah, we're grateful to have you. Thanks,
Great,
everyone.
See you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.